Long time, and I've read a lot of the work that Brian Krapf has done. You will members of the International Churchill Society, the monthly Churchill Bulletin, the email blast that's sent out every month by the International Churchill Society, you will recognize the name Brian Krapf. He's a regular contributor to that, informing us about the world of Churchill collectibles. I don't think there is anyone who has amassed more knowledge about Winston Churchill collectibles than Brian Krapf. His new book, A Churchill Treasury, is out now, and I encourage you all to pick up a copy if you don't already have one. Brian will talk a little bit about his book, and he spent a few hours yesterday touring the museum, and we went into the collection and storage area, and he immediately got excited about a number of objects. So he's going to tell us a little bit about some of the things we have here. So Brian, thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Tim, thank you for inviting me to come. It's an honor beyond words to be here. A few other people I want to thank. Pete Nichols, who is the photographer of the items in my book, is here. He and his wife Robin came up from Savannah, and I'm so glad he's here. Many a Sunday was spent staging these items and getting them ready for the book. Pete, thank you. Pete's also the former communications director for the National Museum of the Mighty Eighth in Savannah, which is a fabulous museum. I invite you all to come. You'll never miss it. I also want to thank Lee Pollock, who's the interim executive director of the International Churchill Society. Lee supported and inspired me to write this book when it was just as an inception, just an idea. So Lee, thank you. Lastly, I want to thank all of you. The only reason you're here is to preserve the life and promote the legacy of Sir Winston Churchill. That's why we're all here today. And it's a labor of love and a heartfelt responsibility, and that's what brings us together. My corner of the world is collecting Churchilliana. Churchilliana is the term used to describe period artifacts made during Sir Winston's 60 years of public service. They include everything from textiles, paper, celluloid, porcelain, glassware, wood, anything used to promote Sir Winston from his first run, actually from the time he was a Boer War correspondent through his death. So the book is divided into several different sections, and I want to give you an overview of what it's like. When I chose the items for the book, they were all from my personal 30-plus year collection. It was a matter of deselection. I took a topic and picked items for it and then took away items. So what you're seeing are items that are rare, items that have not been published before. There are collectors' guides out for Churchilliana, but this book is different. Number one, it pictures a lot of things that aren't in those collectors' guides, and number two, it provides a timeline of Sir Winston's 60 years of history through the artifacts that were contemporaneous with the time. So we start with Lord Randolph, who Sir Winston said was his chief inspiration. You can find Lord Randolph items on the market. This is the only one I've seen. It's actually a certificate thanking a campaign worker issued at Blenheim Palace in 1880. The photograph of Lord Randolph is a real photograph that's tipped in. Very unique item. Just like others of the Victorian era, the Victorians, of course, loved knickknacks. had shelves in their homes built only for knickknacks. Lord Randolph appears on plates. He appears on a spill vase with the Churchill coat of arms. And he appears as a Perry-and-Ware bust along with others of the period. Next, after Lord Randolph, we get into Churchill's early career, the Boer War, 1899, through his role as Home Secretary in the Asquith government. This is a stereoscope card. It's one of the earliest images, one of the earliest public images of Churchill as a Boer War correspondent. It was made by the Keystone View Company as part of their Boer War series. Next, of course, the escape from Pretoria launched him into a lecture series both in Britain and in America and Canada. The first here is a postcard printed in French from a Boer War series, and it says, "Lord Churchill is the one with his back to the camera wearing a cap." So I don't know if you can see it from there, but there he is with like a bag over his shoulder. The newspaper advertisement was how his lecture series was advertised in America and Canada. In Britain, there were some posters for it, but in America and again in Canada, the traditional way to advertise speakers was to put an ad in the paper. So that's what this is. We've all seen this. This is Churchill in 1900. You can actually buy a reproduction of this in the museum store. This is from Vanity Fair, done by Spy. When you got the magazine, you know, it was full of illustrations. You could go to the Vanity Fair office and actually buy a print. That's what this is. When I show this to audiences, people are surprised to know that Churchill had red hair. They never knew that. So here he is as a young redhead. This is from the 1908 West Manchester by-election, which he lost. But it is a push card for him. It's not a postcard. It's an actual push card for the election. And then a little poem written about him, just a first-hand narrative. I can't read it from here. I don't know if you could read it, but that's one of the things I include in the collection is first-hand accounts. Here we have the 1910 People's budget election. Churchill, Lloyd George, and Asquith. You have the liberals in the top falling out of the airplane. There's Lloyd George holding on to the people's budget. And then in the bottom, of course, part of what they wanted to do in 1910 was to abolish the House of Lords. So you see a peer disappear. And there's Churchill and Lloyd George and Asquith removing the peer. This is a Goss figurine representing the people's budget. It's a wonderful piece that talks about all the issues that are heaped onto the back of the average man. Churchill was also not popular with some people, obviously. He was caricatured here in 1910 as a clown. Next we have Churchill as Home Secretary, and he's issuing a ticket to attend the coronation parade of King George V. And one of the things I love about this ticket, first of all, it's for Admiralty Arch, which is a wonderful place to go if you haven't been. Very special historic place. Ladies are especially requested not to wear large hats. Next we have, as Home Secretary, a real photo postcard of the siege of Sydney Street. As the Home Secretary, he actually went in and participated with the police, and there he is peering around a corner. It was one of the very first films ever made of the action of a police action, and he caught a lot of flack for being there. Next, we cover the period 1911 through 1924, in which he was First Lord of the Admiralty in the Great War. He went into the trenches. He was Minister of Munitions. Secretary for Air and War, Colonial Secretary, and of course MP for Epping. So these photographs, the Admiralty had a yacht called the Enchantress. And Churchill loved to take the Enchantress on trips with large entourages. And he would inspect naval installations, but at the same time, enjoy the yacht. These photographs are private photographs that were purchased from a descendant of the Enchantress crew. And they show very private glimpse into the life of one of the most public men. There's Churchill on a golf course. There's Churchill at the seaside with his pants legs rolled. Here he is on the deck wearing his yachting cap. So a very rare glimpse, and these are in the book, plus some more. As First Lord of the Admiralty beginning in 1911, and going into the Great War, he was on postcards. Here he is on a T-10, and it's just one of my favorite postcards called Men of the Moment series. The wooden figure here is Churchill dressed as Britannia ruling the waves, and this was made from compressed wood, and they were made as kits. There's one of Asquith as well, made in kits for the recovering wounded soldiers of the Lord Roberts homes to put together and sell as a fundraiser. There is one of these on display currently in the Great War exhibition at the Imperial War Museum. I feel privileged to have one myself. In the middle is a Goss bust of Churchill as First Lord, and the end piece here is a set of clothing buttons of the Asquith government during the war, and there's Churchill as Lord of the Admiralty and other people who served. Clothing buttons. This is an interesting piece too. It's unmistakably Churchill. The bottom is marked Sir John Porter. Sir John Porter is a central character in the Pirates of Penzance. He's the bumbling, stumbling child of privilege who becomes Lord of the Admiralty and is bumbling and stumbling. When you see pictures of him, if you Google Sir John Porter, he's a much older man. This is unmistakably Churchill in that role. There are contemporaneous newspapers after Gallipoli which parody Churchill as a Sir John Porter. Here we have Sir John Porter in the flesh. He's Winston Churchill. Gallipoli is a disaster. So it's actually an anti-Churchill piece, a bisque statue. And then we have a dinner from the munitions of war when he was Ministry of Munitions. Very rare to find for that small period of Churchill's actual large career. And here he is actually in the second picture there. He is Minister of Air. He's actually in Paris. And there he is on the stump campaigning for MP from Epping. Next, we get into the Chapter 4, Chancellor of the Exchequer, and return to the Admiralty. Chancellor of the Exchequer, items were made for this period of Churchill. The first piece you see here is a very light celluloid tape measure. You pull on the cigar, and that's where the tape measure is. There's one made for Lloyd George. You pull on his mouth because he was known for his gift of gab. And then there's also one for Stanley Baldwin. You pull on his pipe, which he was known, of course, as a pipe smoker. The middle piece is a Parian bust made of Churchill when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. And the last piece is made by Goss. It is the very first ever Churchill Toby. It was made in 1927 to celebrate him as Chancellor of the Exchequer. We then get into what is erroneously called his wilderness years. I mean, that sounds from wilderness years like he was ambling without direction, stumbling, whatever. It is a misnomer. He was, after being Chancellor of the Exchequer, he did not have a seat in government. He was still an MP, But he used this time to write, and you see a postcard here promoting in 1933 a series that was printed in the newspaper. He also used this time to particularly speak out against what he saw as an impending Nazi takeover. He was warning Britain and the world of the disaster which was going to befall Europe. He gave a speech in, I think, 1934, 1935, called The Causes of War. It was broadcast live on the BBC, and it was also published afterwards in the BBC journal titled The Listener. And that is actually a newsstand advertisement for the speech. And it's considered one of his greatest speeches actually during this period. I can't read this offhand, sorry. But this is written by a secretary of Churchill's, again, during the quote-unquote wilderness years, by the name of Mary Sherborne. She writes to her former employer talking about what it is like working as a secretary for Winston Churchill, and talks about how they're up at all hours of the night. There are two secretaries that are kept continually busy. He dictates in the car, even though it's exhausting, it's exhilarating. So again, a firsthand account that I was fortunate to find that is in the collection and also in the book. Now, Mary Sherborne is an interesting character. She later married Churchill's bodyguard, Inspector Thompson. So, we add matchmaker to all of Churchill's impressive titles. Next, we have the Return to Admiralty, and these are two plaster items that were made for the occasion. One is Churchill standing on top of the battleship Winston, and the other is Churchill in his uniform with a bulldog called Winston the Winner. Next, we get into the first premiership. There were, at the start of the war, the British porcelain manufacturing had been taken over by the government for the war effort. It was requisitioned to make wartime products. What happened is that Churchill started, after the Blitz in 1940, opening what he called British restaurants. He despised socialism throughout his entire career, and he thought feeding center sounded too much like government intrusion. He knew that the government, though, had to feed the displaced people from the Blitz, people who had lost their homes, lost their neighborhoods, were without work, and he said that he wanted to establish British restaurants where someone could go in and eat a freshly cooked meal just as they would at home, on a tablecloth, with china, with silverware, and glassware. So he needed porcelain, he needed china, and he needed a lot of it, and a lot of it quickly. He approached the porcelain manufacturers, and they worked out a deal where they could once again manufacture limited commemorative items, as Britain always has. But the kicker was that the manufacturers made them for export, and a portion of the profit had to be kicked back to the government to help pay for Lend-Lease. So there is a government background, a historical background for these items. They're not just pretty items to sit on a shelf. Now, coupled with this was the fact that the workers in the porcelain factories had all gone off to war. The porcelain manufacturers brought back retired workmen who had been working in the porcelain factories and were no longer there, brought back they were, in many instances, inflicted with pulmonary illnesses. The porcelain manufacturing business was not a very pleasant place to work. When you were in the factory, you inhaled dust, you inhaled chemicals, you inhaled fumes from the firing of these items, and you retired with a lot of pulmonary illnesses. So those were the workers who replaced the workers who had gone to war, and they never got back up to full production. During the war, they functioned at about 60% capacity because these retired workers were doing the best they can, but they didn't have the energy and strength of the young people. What we see here are two pieces made or designed by the famous British porcelain molder, Clarice Cliff. This was the Wilkinson Pottery Company. You mainly see Clarice Cliff in Art Deco tableware that has funky shapes and bright colors, like salt and pepper shakers that are designed as pyramids and painted yellow and orange and purple. She was known for that Art Deco design, and you still find it in the British markets. But she designed this charger for Churchill. The Toby was actually made in a limited edition of 300 for Christmas 1942 and sold exclusively through Harrods. This was actually the design Wilkinson had made for a set during the Great War, which featured the British leaders of the Great War. But after Gallipoli and after Churchill's resignation from Admiralty, they tabled the Churchill, but luckily they saved the design. During World War II, Clarice Cliff reinvigorated it, and now it's the Prime Minister. Of course, the bulldog image. The one on the left is made by Crown Devon and is very popular. The one on the right is the only piece known to have Churchill's head on a bulldog's body. It's very hard to find, too. We have here a tabletop lighter. You would find these on the counters in hotels and pubs. You pull the cigar out, light it on the striker box on the bottom, and you light your cigar with it. There is a vat in the back where you put the lighter fluid. The other pieces are what we call utility ware. These were made for the British public. They are always distinguished by the same brown tone image of the Prime Minister. And you find this image on pictures, on teacups, on plates, and so forth, solely made for British domestic use. We have a trio of soap. Churchill hanging Tojo and Hitler out to dry, or I'm sorry, Hitler and Mussolini out to dry. We have a puzzle here where Churchill was first entering the scene with Hitler, and there's Stalin behind him, and we think that's Halifax in the back, or Halifax on the side, and the former Prime Minister in the back. We have a children's book. This is a very interesting thing. Children's books are their own collectible, wartime children's books. I have a small collection of them. I love them when I find them. You know, how do you explain to a child the changes they're going to note in their own environment, the equipment they're going to see rolling by, people in uniform, street signs taken down, rationing of food? Well, there are books that were made for children to explain all that. And this is a child's biography of Churchill published shortly after he became Prime Minister. You can't be the Prime Minister without being horn-doggled into advertising. So here is Churchill advertising Ogilvy's Blindy cereal, probably never ate it. And here he is advertising beer, which he didn't drink. So, you know, his face was used to sell these items. We then get into the Churchill and Roosevelt special relationship. This is a decal on the left-hand side. A pair of pictures made and designed by Eric Olson, the primary sculptor for Spode. And up top is a loving cup made by Wade for victory. Churchill is one handle, Roosevelt's the other. The world is the vessel. We also get into the big three. These pieces I found on a trip, oh my gosh, maybe 5 years ago. They're hand carved, just amazing. Somebody with a lot of talent made these. The top piece is Russian made. It's the big three made of Russian silver on a cigarette box. We then get into the victory, different badges that were used for victory. The one on the bottom right is actually a pocket mirror. And then we get into the 45 election, the second premiership, and Churchill's passing. This is chapter 6, the last chapter of my book. This is one of my favorite items. This is the Coalition Medal. Churchill paid for these out of his own pocket and had them commissioned by a London jeweler to give to each member personally of the Great Wartime Coalition. These are usually passed down in families. They never come to market. I was fortunate to find one that belonged to or was given by Winston Churchill to Lord Krapf, who was the Undersecretary of Air. Lord Krapf passed away with no heirs, so his Coalition Medal came to market, and it's one of my favorite items. Duncan Sands, a dear friend of mine, who many of you probably know, was at my home, and I proudly showed Duncan my Coalition Medal, and he says, "I've got my grandfather's." Okay, we get into the 1945 election. This is a rare surviving poster from the July 3, 1945 Walthamstow rally. Churchill came to speak for an MP candidate named Curran. This is the famous Walthamstow rally where Churchill was booed. It was a horrible disaster. Labor laid a trap for him. He came into the stadium, they were booing. Churchill stopped his speech and said, "Okay, have a good boo," and let him go ahead and boo. Then he resumed. Unfortunately, the conservatives put him on the side of the stadium where the sun was in his eyes, and so he gave his speech always like this. He couldn't see. The next poster is a coattail poster for 1945. You know, the 1945 election, in which the Conservative Party took a horrible hit, was not a moratorium on Churchill. Churchill, after the war, had a 70-plus approval rating. It was on the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party had very little apparatus on the ground for a ground game for the election because of the war. Labor was making all of these promises of health care and housing and so forth. The coattail is printed on this. A lot of times you'll find these posters with the coattail glued on. This is actually printed. This is Wing Commander Robinson, and he's Churchill's man, the people's man, and proud of it. Wing Commander Robinson is a very interesting character. He was the RAF's liaison to the Eagle Squadron during the war. After he left Parliament, he became governor of the Bahamas, and that's where he passed away, is doing his duty in the Bahamas. Here is a coattail poster for 45 and an anti-Churchill pamphlet, actually, where he's being knocked out of Big Ben. We have Fulton, Missouri. We have the banner here that was used for the Iron Curtain speech, the button, ticket, and a press pass. The Luton Gymkhana is from 1948. It was a huge Churchill speech. 30,000 people came to Luton. A gymkhana is kind of like a event of horse races and things like that. But that's the tag, the handbill, and the pamphlet from one of the largest events of Churchill's career. And then, of course, he published his memoirs. This is a newsstand advertisement from the New York Times. The 1951 election, we have a little bit of British humor. We have a button worn by the public. Even though they didn't vote for prime minister, they demanded that Churchill return in 1951. And then we have a news poster that would have been used in movie theaters to advertise the news of the day, and it advertises Winston coming back. These were made in the years for the second premiership. These are chalkware figurines. There are many. There's a Toby jug made for the second premiership. Metal was released, and there's 2 metal paperweights. We then have his 80th birthday celebration. This is a cartoon by Stroob, which celebrated all the different hats Churchill had worn during his career. You could buy this actually from the newspaper as a print. In the bottom, again, 2 of my favorite pieces. These are from 1955, made by sculptor John Douglas. They're Churchill bookends. Each bookend is a different figure of Churchill. The last election, 1959, his silhouette was enough to carry the vote. And then, of course, his passing. This is a invitation to a luncheon after his funeral service held by Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. He's dead, let's eat. So, but it's a way I end the book. It's outside of the field of the period I collect, but I thought that it was just a powerful way to end the book. Thank you, Sir Winston, for everything you gave to this world. So that's the book. I told Tim that we could have some show and tell, which I love to do when I speak. These are a little bit precarious, so pardon me if I'm very careful with them. This is a very well-known Toby by Royal Dalton. This is actually one of Royal Dalton's best sellers. It was made from 1940 to about 1985. The way to distinguish them is on the bottom. The very first run in 1940 says Winston Churchill Prime Minister. All subsequent runs just say Winston Churchill. So that's how you distinguish. The very first run is the most desirable for a collector. They're hard to find. I have friends who go to markets in Britain and turn over every single jug looking for the Holy Grail. This is a piece that's made its way into many a home, into many a collection. It's an ashtray actually made by Royal Dalton during the war with Churchill's image in it. Very nice piece, fairly common, but still just a nice piece to have. Wartime Churchill briar pipes. These were made in molds, a lot of fun, and they've been made for many leaders. There's an FDR, there's a Truman, so they're a lot of fun. This is made by Truscott of Utoria. Wonderful jug that's readily found. His hat comes off, and a lot of times you'll find him without the hat because people forget that the hat is detached and turn him over. But always look for one with the hat. We then have the famous bulldogs. This has found its way into many a home. It's a wonderful, wonderful jug. It was made by Burgess and Lee, which is called Burleyware on the market, and he's a wartime piece as well. Just a wonderful representation. Lastly, Tim and I saw this yesterday. I just love it. You've seen the Welcome to Westminster, Truman, and Churchill pennants. This is a reproduction for when Margaret Thatcher came here. Just absolutely wonderful how they used the original design and updated it, showing that history is timeless. I'll want one of these. I'll find one day. So that is my corner of the world. So can I answer any questions for anybody?
Yes, sir.
You probably can answer my dilemma, because in our collection, a dilemma I have because I had heard that an item in our collection was a Nazi propaganda piece, and I don't know if that's true or not. It's Churchill mooning you.
Yes, it is. It was used by the Hitler Youth to go door to door soliciting donations.
Did you
It's
see the one in
100%.
our collection?
I'm sorry?
Did you see the one in our collection?
No, but I've seen them on the market. For some reason, they get into the American market, and they are. They're German propaganda. They're war period, but German propaganda.
Well, thank you again, Brian, so much for being with us today and
Well,
sharing
thank you
your
for the
work.
honor.
We're going to take about a 1-minute break here and reset for our final